Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we've got our season preview video to come up. We've done our season preview series going over every single team, how I think they did in the off season, how I think they're going over to do to this upcoming season. I'm giving you my full season predictions and playoff predictions for this upcoming 23-24 season. If you want to see where your team stands, stay tuned as it's coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Edmonton Hockey Channel. Remember, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. We've done so well. We're so close to 200 subscribers. You guys have been so supportive. I could never do this channel without you, so don't forget to like this video and subscribe. But as I talked about over the past couple of days in my last few videos, I'm going to be doing a season preview video here. I did one last year. I got some things right, I got some things wrong. Like, I predicted Boston to miss the playoffs. They wound up winning the league. I projected the Columbus Blue Jackets to make the playoffs. They missed. I projected the Senators to make the playoffs. They missed. I projected the Devils to miss the playoffs. They made it. I projected the Kraken to miss the playoffs, and they made it. So, yeah, there was a couple of things that got wrong last year, so definitely not going to be 100% right, but it's something that I like to do. It's fun. I would also like to hear your guys' opinions, and there's also a couple of things that I think I'll definitely be able to get right. So, here's my season preview predictions for the upcoming season. I'll also do the playoffs as well. Now, in this video here, we're going to do a Western Conference preview. I'll do another video in a couple of hours talking about the Eastern Conference, so definitely don't forget to stay tuned for that. But for the Western Conference, we're going to go first with the Central Division, then with the Pacific Division. Going to go through who I have 8th all the way through the first, and I'm going to give you my quick playoff predictions for the teams that have making the playoffs, and who I have going to the Stanley Cup Final of the Western Conference. So first, we're going to start over here with the Central Division. This is going to be a wide open division, in my opinion, besides most likely the top 2 teams. I'm going to start with the 8th team that I have in the Central Division, and I don't think this comes as much surprise to anyone, and that is the Chicago Blackhawks. The Blackhawks did a fantastic job this offseason. They added Taylor Hall. They added Connor Bedard. They kept Andreas Antonescu. They added a couple of veterans in Corey Perry and Nick Foligno. They added a lot this offseason. I think their offense is going to be better, especially with the addition of Bedard, who's going to be a fantastic generational talent. I think Bedard's going to be a fantastic point producer in Chicago this upcoming season. So I really do like what the Hawks have done, but their goaltending's still a little bit off. They have a really young blue line. Even after all those additions, their offensive group is still not where it needs to be. So even after all those things, I still don't see the Hawks doing overly well. I think their offense will do well. The power play should be doing a lot better than it was last year. Their defense and goaltending should be okay. But I don't see the Hawks making the playoffs. I think there's way too many teams to jump, and I think they're still probably one of the more likely bottom dwellers in the NHL. I have the Hawks finishing with a record of 31-42-9 for 71 points, dead last in the Central Division. So I think the Hawks do finish dead last in the Central. I think they keep the spot in the basin that they had this past year, and I think even though they'll grow and they'll be a lot better than they were last year by gaining a couple more points, they're still going to be a little bit ways away from competing for a playoff spot. At 7th in the Central Division, I have the St. Louis Blues. The Blues, in my opinion, did not do enough in this offseason to get back into the playoffs. I think there's a ton of teams in that conference that are better than the Blues at this point in time. Their forward group looks all right. They added Verana and Kapanen at the deadline, which I think were fantastic top 9 additions. I wanted them to try and move some things around the defensive end. They tried to, but they never did. I am really concerned about that blue line again. It did not do overly well last year. I'm worried that it's not going to do overly well again this year. Binnington, ever since winning the Stanley Cup, his numbers have gone down each and every year, so if Binnington does not do well, they're going to have a lot of pressure on Joel Hofer to become the team starter. And I'm not sure if the young goalie is ready for that sort of role. So I think their goaltending has some questions with Binnington. I think their defense has a ton of questions after the poor showing they had last year. I think the forward group could definitely do all right, but I'm not sure that the Blues are going to be a team who's going to be able to compete with all these other teams for a playoff spot. I have the Blues finishing with a record of 36-39-7 for 79 points. No, that's probably a little bit lower than most people have the Blues as, but I think the Blues, their defense is not overly great. Binnington has not played overly well over the past couple of years. On top of those two things, you have the forward group, while decent, I'm not sure if they'll be able to save the Blues butts all the time. They're in a pretty competitive Central Division as well. So, in my eyes, Blues finished 7th in the division, ahead of the Hawks for sure, but I think they will finish a lot lower than some people expect. 6th, I have the Winnipeg Jets. The Jets are a solid team. Hello everyone, just an update here from the future before I get into my Winnipeg Jets side of the Central Division. Most of my predictions was having the Jets trade Scheifele and Hellebuyck, but just recently the Winnipeg Jets have signed Scheifele and Hellebuyck to major contract extensions. So even though I'm saying that Scheifele and Hellebuyck are going to be traded, and I do have them at 84 points, I think it's a little bit changed now. I do think they'll do a little bit better than they were. They're definitely going to keep Scheifele and Hellebuyck now. So with them keeping Scheifele and Hellebuyck, I know I predicted them having 38, 36, and 8 record for 84 points. With all this news updates here from the Jets signing Scheifele and Hellebuyck, I'm probably going to give them a little bit more points. I would probably say they finish with around 88 to 90 points instead of 84. So take that with a grain of salt. I do expect them to do a little bit better than they were originally predicting them in this video, but with the signings. But I still project them to miss the playoffs. I think they finish around 88 to 90 points, probably same around points as Arizona or Calgary. But at this point in time, I do have them missing the playoffs still. So just a quick update there, just to rectify my positions on the Winnipeg Jets finishing 6th in the Central Division. I do think they'll finish either 6th or 5th, but I do think they'll still miss the playoffs. Just a quick update here, back to the regularly scheduled video. I think if everything goes right for them, they will definitely have a shot to make the playoffs. But the problem is, I don't see everything going right for the Jets. I see them being a bubble team, in which case they move Scheifele and Hellebuyck at the deadline. And with them moving Scheifele and Hellebuyck at the deadline, they're not going to make the playoffs. So at this point in time, I have the Jets had a solid offseason. They moved Dubois and Wheeler, which were moves the Jets didn't want to make, but they had to. And they bring in a couple of decent forwards, like Iafallo, like Kupari, Velarde. They go out, they get Brossoit to be the backup, Delia to be a third-string goaltender. They bring back most of the same defense, which I think could be a concern for them. But I think this Jets team could be doing all right this upcoming season. But I don't trust them fully enough to be in a safe enough position where they aren't considering trading Scheifele and Hellebuyck at the deadline. So I think that at the deadline they move Scheifele and Hellebuyck, sort of have a little bit of a stumble after deadline, like we saw Washington and Detroit do last year. And I have them finishing with a record of 38, 36, and 8 for 84 points for 6th in the Central. I don't see them making the playoffs. I don't see them being too far out either. I think they finish like under 10 points away from a playoff spot. The big question, though, I do think is I still can't see the Jets go past the deadline if they're not a guaranteed playoff spot with Scheifele and Hellebuyck unsigned on their roster. I just think that's my personal opinion. I think if they do trade him, the Jets will fall off a little bit and they'll finish with 84 points. So that's where I have the Jets at this point in time. 6th in the Central Division. I could see them finish higher, but at this point in time, I think that's where the Jets finish. Going over to 5th in the Central Division, and I have a surprise team here in the Arizona Coyotes. I think the Coyotes are going to do a lot better than a lot of people expect. As you can see on the thumbnail, I have them finishing with a record of over 500. Now, they did really good this offseason, added Jason Zucker on the forward group as well as Alex Kerfoot, brought back Nick Bukestad and Troy Stetcher. Defensively, they got Matt Dumba. On the goaltending side, they still have a solid tandem of Vejmelka and Ingram. In my opinion, this team has solid goaltending. Their defense isn't where it needs to be. It's young, it's inexperienced, it's not as good as it could be, but the additions of like Dumba and Jersey and Stetcher in the offseason will make it a little bit better this year. And the forward group looks lethal, especially if you have Logan Cooley, who's a top prospect to that lineup. So if you had all of those guys, you had a decent season last year. I have the Coyotes finishing with a record of 42, 35, and 5 for 89 points. I have them finishing within a handful of points back of a playoff spot, but I don't have them making the playoffs. I don't think they're playoff ready yet, but I do think they're ready to start competing for a playoffs. I think sometime around February, March, you could see the Arizona Coyotes still in the playoff race. I think they're that good. I don't think many people think that the Arizona Coyotes are going to be a fantastically good team this year. They are. I think they're ready to start competing, but not for a playoff spot yet. I think they'll do better than last year. I think they'll get over 500 record. I'm not sure if they'll go for the playoffs, but I definitely see the Coyotes doing a ton better than last year and finishing 5th in the Central. At 4th in the Central, I have the Nashville Predators. They went this offseason, did a lot of things good. They moved Duchesne, they moved Johansson. Those were bad contracts. They need to move on from them. They added Luke Shen, Ryan O'Reilly, Gustav Nyquist to join their younger core group, on the forward group especially, where they have young guys like Tomasino, like Evangelista, like Glass, like Novak, all getting into more regular top 9 roles. So with all of that, I have the Nashville Predators, who did have a pretty good offseason, finishing with a record of 39, 30, and 13 for 91 points, 4th in the Central Division. So as much as I think that the Preds are a pretty good team, I don't have them making the playoffs. I have them being really tight in the contention for the last playoff spot with a couple of other teams. But I do think the Preds probably just miss out. I still have some problems about the forward group. Exactly how good can those young guys be? Their defense should probably be good again. Saros is always going to be a stellar goaltender, but I do have some problems with the forward group and to see how much points they can produce, because they lost a lot of guys now, moving players like Granlund, Duchesne, Johansson. Even if their contracts weren't good, those are all solid point-producing forwards. So until I can see a solid improvement on their forward group with their young players, I'm not going to put the Preds in the playoffs, but I think they'll do definitely a fantastic job next year. Next, going over to 3rd in the Central Division, I have the Minnesota Wild. The Wild this year signed a lot of players to extensions over the past weeks, like Zuccarello, Hartman, Foligno. They did not do much in season to change up this team. They added Jujhar Khaira on the forward group. That's really it. They lost a couple of in-season acquisitions like Klingberg and Nyquist and Sundqvist. They also had lost Matt Dumba, but they have a decent forward group, in my opinion, still led by Kaprizov and Zuccarello. They have a solid defensive core, especially with younger guys like Addison and Faber coming into the lineup. Gustafsson showed last year he can be a solid starting goaltender. You still have Fleury. In my eyes, the Wild are a solid team. I think even though they're probably closer to the middling Arizona Coyotes, Nashville Preds, Winnipeg Jets than they are to the top 2 teams in the Central Division, I think they're a team who's most likely going to make the playoffs. I think they grabbed the 3rd spot in the Central Division with a record of 43, 29, and 10 for 96 points. It's a little bit low on this point side. They don't reach the 100-point total, in my opinion, this year, but I do think they have what it takes to reach the 3rd spot in the Central Division. They're a solid team. They had a good season last year. If you take away the in-season acquisitions, they didn't really lose anything overly significant this year, and they have a couple of young defensemen to replace Matt Dumba. So, in my eyes, the Wild are probably going to make the playoffs again as the 3rd seed. 2nd seed in the Central Division, I have the Colorado Avalanche. They did a really good job this year. Did not touch much on the defensive end, not touch much on the goaltending side. They still have their solid goaltenders, but on top of that, they did rework their forward group a little bit to make the roster better without Kadri, who they didn't have last year after he left via free agency, and Landeskog, who's injured right now. I mean, they acquired Ryan Johansson, Ross Colton as the guy who they acquired, Miles Wood, Tomas Tatar, amongst a couple of other guys as well. I think that forward group looks a lot better than it was last year. And as long as they can stay healthy, this Avalanche team is going to be a fantastic team this year. If you look at the Avalanche, in my opinion, I have them finishing with a record of 51, 23, and 8 for 110 points. 2nd in the Central Division. So I think this team is going to be a fantastic team to watch. The Avalanche are going to be a fantastic team. I like their moves on the offensive side. I like the additions of a guy like Ross Colton. I think their defense is still a really stacked defense. Georgiev showed last year he can be a solid starting goaltender. In my eyes, the Avalanche are definitely going to be a top 2 team in the Central Division. But I don't have them being 1st in the Central this year. I have that honor going to the Dallas Stars. The Dallas Stars, who had a pretty good season this past year, did not lose overly much. A couple of bomb six-forwards like Glendening, Kiviranta, a couple of decent depth defensemen like a Miller. They add Duchesne, who's going to be a fantastic top 6 addition. Sam Steele, who's going to be a fantastic top 9 addition. They lose Craig Smith, who was a decent bomb six forward. So they lose a couple of pieces, but they add a lot of them. They still have Andre, they still have Wedgwood. That defense, while maybe not overly significantly improved, is still a solid defense. Their forward group's getting better and better. In my eyes, this Dallas Stars team is poised to go far this year. I have them finishing with a record of 54, 22, and 6 for 114 points. 1st in the Central Division. So I have the Dallas Stars upending the Colorado Avalanche to win the Central Division this year. I think they are a solid team, and I think Stars could definitely do it. So just to recap, here's my Central Division standings. If you guys don't remember, it's Chicago at 8, St. Louis at 7, Winnipeg at 6, Arizona at 5, Nashville at 4, Minnesota at 3, Colorado at 2, and Dallas at 1. I think that the Wild, the Avalanche, and the Stars all make the playoffs. So I think Nashville has a shot. I think Arizona has a little bit of an outside shot. If everything goes right for Winnipeg, I think they have a shot. St. Louis maybe has a shot, but I don't see Chicago having a shot at making the playoffs. So that's my Central Division preview here. Going over to the Pacific Division, once again, 8 through 1. At 8th overall, I have the San Jose Sharks. Now the Sharks moved one of their if not the best player on that team last year, in Erik Karlsson, the Pittsburgh, this offseason. That was not a really good move. They replaced Karlsson with guys like Jan Ruta, Kyle Burrows, who are decent players, but they're not Karlsson. In the net, they lose James Reimer, who had a good season last year, replace him with Mackenzie Blackwood, who's had injury history and has not been a fantastic goalie over the past couple of years. Forward group looks a ton better. They add guys like Mikael Granlund, who can put up points. Mike Hoffman's not a bad addition. Philip Zadina can maybe rejuvenate his career there. Anthony Duclair's a solid top 6 forward. So their forward group looks a lot better than it did last year, but their defensive group looks atrocious. I'm still not confident in Kakinen and Blackwood, and I think this Sharks team is poised to be a bottom 3 team in the NHL. My current projected point total for the Sharks is 27, 48, and 7 for 61 points, last in the Pacific Division. I don't think many people will argue with that. Sharks are most likely going to be a bottom dweller again this year. 7th in the Pacific Division is the Anaheim Ducks. I think the Ducks are going to do fantastic this year. I think they'll do a little bit better than they were last year, but not overly much. I like the addition of Killorn, who's going to fit well in that top 6. I like the addition of Radko Gudas, who's going to finish well in the Ducks top 4. I like those 2 additions. They're going to have some younger guys come up into the lineup this year. Leo Carlson's going to be a fantastic addition. They still have McTavish, Zegras, Terry. I wonder if one of their younger defensemen wind up making that roster, like Pavel Mitnyakov. So there's going to be a lot of good young players in Anaheim, but they're still going to have a lot of growing pains. I like their goaltending in Gibson and Dostal. Defensively, still a lot of problems. Probably going to be a lot of hiccups this year. Offensively, their top 6 and top 9 should definitely be able to put up points, but I'm not exactly sure the Ducks are going to be able to leapfrog a whole bunch of teams in the Pacific Division and become playoff contenders. I have them finishing with a record of 28, 44, and 10 for 66 points. So I have them missing the playoffs by a good amount of points. I don't have them making the playoffs, and I think most people will expect that Anaheim and San Jose probably take up the 7-8 spots in the Pacific Division. So I have the Ducks finishing 7th. At 6th, I think some people might find this a little bit of a surprise. Some might, some might not. I have the Calgary Flames finishing 6th in the Pacific Division. Now, the Flames did basically nothing this offseason. They acquired Igor Sharangovich for Tyler Toffoli. It's a decent trade in my opinion. They add Jordan Osterley, lose a couple of bottom 6 forwards, like a Lewis, like a Lucic, like a Ritchie. So they do make a couple of moves this offseason, but nothing overly significant. Not what a lot of people thought the Calgary Flames would do, but they did make a couple of moves. In my opinion, they did all right, and if they can have bounce back performances from Huberdeau, from Markstrom, from some of the other players who didn't do overly well last year, I think they could definitely make the playoffs. But just given the fact of how competitive the Pacific Division is, and the fact that if they're on the bubble heading towards the trade line, they may move pending UFAs if they're not signed at that point, like Lindholm, Hanifin, Tanev, Zadorov, so on and so forth. So I think there's a strong possibility the Flames could move a couple of players. Now, I still think they'll do pretty good. I have them finishing with a record of 41, 35, and 6 for 88 points. So I have them finishing with a solid record, finishing only a handful of points out of the playoff spot, even if they were to possibly move a couple of players. I think the Flames could still do fantastic in the playoffs, sort of like what Nashville did when they were sellers, but they did all right. I think that's something that Calgary could do this offseason, but the big question, I think, is exactly how well can they do, and if they do move players, which players are being moved at the deadline. So I think it's going to be interesting, but I have Calgary finishing just on the outside looking in. I don't have them finishing too far back, and I think it's quite possible that the Flames could wind up making the playoffs. So going over to number 5 in the Pacific Division, that is Vancouver Canucks. Canucks did all right this offseason. I think they did quite well. They moved OEL via a buyout. They lost a couple of other defensemen. They add Carson Seuss, who's a decent top 6 forward. Same thing with Ian Cole. They're now going to have a full season of Philip Hronek. They also added a guy like Sam Lafferty yesterday on the forward group. Goaltending-wise, they had a solid backup for Demko and Smith. All in all, I think this team looks really, really good. They have Bluger and Suter on the forward group, so their forward group looks lethal. Their defense, I think, looks a little bit more stable than last year. Demko seems to be healthy this year, and they have a solid backup in the Smith. In my opinion, the Canucks are destined to make the playoffs. I have them finishing with a record of 43, 32, and 7 for 93 points. I have them making the playoffs. I think the Canucks have done enough in this offseason to put them in the playoffs. So I think that's fantastic for the Canucks, and I think they've definitely done well this offseason. Next, I'm going over to the 4th spot in the Pacific Division. This may come as a surprise, But I have the LA Kings here. I have the LA Kings who did well this offseason. They lost a couple of decent defensemen like Jersey, like Walker. They lost a couple of decent goaltenders in like a Corpusalo, replacing him with Cam Talbot in net. They kept Gavrikov around on forward group. They add Pierre Dubois, which I think is a fantastic addition. It comes at the expense of Iafallo, Kupari, and Velarde, but they have the young players to replace those guys. In my opinion, this is a solid Kings team, and I think they can go as high as like a second possibly in this specific division. But I have them with the concerns in the goaltending. I'm not sure that's going to be 100% great. The defense, I think, also has some concerns. I have the Kings finishing with the record of 46, 28, and 8 for 100 points. So I do have them being a solid 3-digit team. I think they're going to be a solid team. I think they could get a lot higher than this. But in my opinion, I think the Kings do wind up being a wildcard team as opposed to a top 3 team in the Pacific Division. Going over to third in the Pacific Division, I have the Seattle Kraken. I think a lot of people would be surprised at where I put the Kraken. The Kraken, I think, are still a really good team, and I think they could still improve off of last year. They did all right this offseason. They lost a couple of guys like Sprong, like Geeky, like a couple of other guys. They add Dumoulin, who I think is going to be a fantastic defensive addition, being able to play with a guy like a Justin Schultz. I think they have Joey Decord be their backup this year. I think that should be a fantastic backup addition. As long as Grubauer can play well, like he did in the playoffs, I think this team should be fine. They add Yamamoto on the forward group. They have Pierre-Edouard Bellemare on the forward group. In my opinion, the Kraken look like a really good team, and I think they're definitely going to be a fantastic team to play against. But I think that they are going to be able to sneak above the LA Kings if Grubauer is able to play better. I think Grubauer should be able to play better than he did last year, and as long as he can do that, I think the Kraken are able to do better than they did last year. I have the Kraken finishing with a record of 47, 27, and 8. For 102 points. So I have them finishing only 2 points over the Kings. I think it's quite easy that those two could flip-flop and that the Kraken could be a wildcard team and the Kings could be a top 3 team. But in my opinion, I think the Kraken are a solid team. I know some people say they could miss the playoffs, could regress a little bit. In my eyes, I see the Kraken making the playoffs. I see the Kraken being a top 3 Pacific Division team. At second in the Pacific Division, I have the Vegas Golden Knights. The Golden Knights had a fantastic offseason this year, doing nothing. They kept Barbashev and Hill. They moved Riley Smith. That's all they did. They kept the band together, and being Stanley Cup champions is all you can ask for. In my opinion, Vegas is poised to do well this year. I have them finishing with a record of 51, 25, and 6 for 108 points. That's a solid point total, in my opinion, for the Vegas Golden Knights. They're a solid team. They look to be really good. I don't have them winning the division again this year. I think they will take a tiny step back, but not a huge step back, and I think they'll still be a solid top 2 team in the Pacific Division. But that leads me to number 1 in the Pacific Division, and I have Connor McDavid and his Edmonton Oilers being first in the Pacific Division. Now, them, like Vegas, did not do overly much this past year. They add Connor Brown, who's a solid top 6 forward. They don't really lose a whole bunch besides a couple of depth options. So they did all right. They lose Yamamoto and Costin, which I think were probably their biggest losses. But they didn't really do much. I think they're going to have a decent season from Jack Campbell. Maybe not a huge bounce-back season, but a decent season. I think Skinner's going to do well. I think their defense, the way it's shaped up right now, looks fantastic. Their forward group is always going to be lethal, top 6, top 9. It's just scary to think about, especially with McDavid and Draisaitl. Also, I think at least in the regular season, the Oilers are going to be a fantastic team. So in my eyes, I have the Oilers finishing first in the Pacific Division with a record of 52, 21, and 9 for 111 points. They break the 110-point plateau. So I think the Oilers are a really good team. I've liked their off-season moves, and I have them finishing first in the Pacific Division instead of the Vegas Golden Knights. So here's a recap of my Pacific Division standings. 8th is the San Jose Sharks. 7th, Anaheim. 6th, Calgary. 5th, Vancouver. 4th, LA. 3rd is the Seattle Kraken. 2nd is the Vegas Golden Knights. And 1st is the Edmonton Oilers. So if you want to recap as to who I have that making the playoffs, I'll show you to you right here. The top 3 teams in the Pacific Division. 1 will be Edmonton, 2 would be Vegas, and 3 would be Seattle. Top 3 teams in the Central Division. 1 would be Dallas, 2 would be Colorado, and 3 would be Minnesota. And the 2 wildcard teams. 1 wildcard would be LA, and the 2nd wildcard will be the Vancouver Canucks. Here are the teams I have missing the playoffs. I have Nashville missing by a couple of points, Arizona missing by a couple of points, same thing with Calgary. I have Winnipeg finishing a couple of points out of a playoff spot. I have St. Louis finishing a handful of points out of a playoff spot. I have the Hawks and then the Ducks, and then the Sharks being the three lowest teams in the Western Conference, and probably three of the lower teams in the NHL. So going to be interesting to see, but that's the way I see the Western Conference playing out. If these were to happen, I highly doubt it would. Most of my predictions will not be right, but if some of these predictions were right and these were the playoffs, you would have matchups of the Dallas Stars and Vancouver Canucks, the Edmonton Oilers and LA Kings again, the Vegas Golden Knights and Seattle Kraken, and the Minnesota Wild and the Colorado Avalanche. At this point in time, if I were to predict anything, I would say Dallas beats the Vancouver Canucks. I would say that the Kraken beat the Golden Knights. I think the Knights are going to be a little bit less likely to go to the Cup Final, just like the Avalanche last year. I think the Kraken could definitely oust the defending Cup champs. I have the Wild ousting the Avalanche. The Wild are a solid team, in my opinion. I think they have the power to oust Colorado. And I would have LA oust Edmonton. After playing them 2 years in a row, I think if Edmonton were to make the playoffs, the one team they would not want to face in the first round, because I don't see Dallas or Colorado facing Edmonton in the first round, the one team they would not want to face out of everyone else in the West would be LA. I think they could beat Seattle. I think they could definitely beat Vegas this year. I think they could definitely beat maybe even some of those other teams. But LA knows what they are up against. They've done this offseason to beat teams like the Oilers. If Edmonton were to draw LA again, I would be scared for Edmonton. So I think LA would go through. Then you have a Kings, Kraken, and Stars Wild second round. I have the Kings being the Kraken. I have the Stars being the Wild. I don't think that would be too much of a surprise. I'll have a Stars-Kings conference final with the Stars going on to the Stanley Cup Final. So I have the Dallas Stars, who win the Western Conference, also winning the West in the playoffs and going on to the Stanley Cup Final. So definitely, that's my West predictions. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments. Who do you think is going to finish where in the Western Conference? Definitely. Do the Canucks make the playoffs? Do the Flames make the playoffs? Do the Preds make the playoffs? Can the Coyotes, can the Jets possibly make the playoffs? Does LA, does Seattle, are they guaranteed to be playoff teams, or are they both going to be possibly out? Minnesota, same thing. I would definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments on what your guys' predictions are for the Western Conference. And do you see Dallas going on to be the Western representative of the Stanley Cup Final? Definitely. Love to hear your guys' thoughts. And don't forget to check out my next video talking about the Eastern Conference. Where do I have the Atlantic and Metro Division standings? And who do I have going to the Stanley Cup Final in the Eastern Conference? Don't forget to stay tuned for that video. But that's what I want to talk about in this video. Remember to like this video and subscribe down below. We're so close to 200 subscribers. Thanks everyone for all of your support. So definitely don't forget to subscribe. Also the blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So definitely don't forget to check that out. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. And can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.